Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome. Today we're going to review By Stealth and Sea from DVG Games, a game of underwater Italian human torpedo attacks during the Second World War, designed by Thompson and Nicola Saggini. Let's start out with our power review. This game generates an amazing amount of narrative. I love the game for this element of it. It's like playing an action movie. In the individual missions, I think you have a good amount of player agency. When you add in the custom campaign, it creates more layers and depth to the agency and really is where the experience of this game shines. Components and research I'm going to put together because I think they both bring the context of the game to life and bring you into reliving this amazing part of World War II history. I love the colors of the game, and the historical research behind the game is so rock solid that it really brings everything to life. I have some minor wonderings about some of the things on the periphery of the experience, but if you like a game that creates drama, if you like exciting games, if you want to relive an amazing part of history, and if you love games that evoke narrative, I can't recommend this game highly enough. I think you'll absolutely love it. Big thumbs up for me. I've absolutely had a fantastic time playing it. All right, let's jump in now to our meaty review. This is where I kind of just ramble on for about 10 minutes or so about some of the, into more depth to some of the points I made in the power review. I want to start with the narrative because I think that's the best place to start with this game. I love games that evoke story, and I love games that you just don't know which way they're going to go. Literally, the point I think that makes it's like playing an action movie. There's so many missions. We played the 8.5 mission campaign, considering we had a little bit of a variant with the last mission. But I think in like 5 of those missions, it came down to literally the last half hour, the last turn of the game. You don't know whether you're going to sink the ship and have a successful mission. You don't know whether your crew is going to survive. Sometimes everything looks hopeless, and all of a sudden, things break your way, and you're like, oh my God, this crew could actually survive and sink this ship. Other times, it looks certain that you're going to blow something up, and then things just go sideways, and all of a sudden your crew's dead, and you haven't sunk anything. And so there's an amazing amount of unpredictability and variety to the missions. And yet at the same time, I think when we talk about agency to this, the individual missions, sometimes I feel like the choices are relatively clear. And so I've seen points where some people say that you're along for the ride with this. I don't think that's a fair criticism at all. I felt like I always had things that were interesting and important to decide. To a certain degree, I think you have to, when you talk about the decisions in this game, you have to think about the element that the dice rolls are going to play and the fact that many times the decisions you're making are going to influence the odds that something good's going to happen or something bad's going to happen. So if you make all the right decisions, you might get to a point where you've got like a 75% chance to sink a ship and a 25% chance to survive. If you make some wrong decisions, you might not make it to the ship and your crew might get captured or your crew. And so there's an element I think in this game where it's poker type decision making. You're trying to optimize your odds for success and you're trying to minimize your odds for failure. And sometimes you can make all the right decisions and the dice roll or the cards are going to take you out. And other times you can make weaker decisions and the dice rolls and the cards are going to save you. That's just kind of the nature of the game. So there's an unpredictability that's in there with the cards and the dice rolls, and yet at the same time, I felt like I had a lot of agency. And I'll talk a little bit more about agency in a second. And I think all of that comes together, that randomness, that agency, and the game's ability to create drama. Those 3 things all weave together to make playing a game incredibly exciting. There were like 3 or 4 missions where I finished and it's like, wow, I'm exhausted. That was so tense. And you get invested in your crews. We'll talk a little bit more about that too. You get invested in your crews, and so you're trying to think, like, do I risk this crew here? Do I not? And some of the decisions are almost agonizing because you don't want them to die, and yet you want to sink the ship. And so you get this kind of back and forth going on in your head and playing out. So, I got totally absorbed in like 3 or 4 missions and had a great time. And the stories that you think back afterwards is like, what happened to these crews on this night in Gibraltar as they try to execute their mission, you're just like, wow, and then you think that real people actually did this, and so it really pulls in that element of history too. So yeah, huge fan of the narrative that this game creates. It's been a very memorable experience. I've loved playing the series because I think that's the real rich strength of this game. I mentioned a little bit about agency and a little bit about luck, so I won't go on about that too much again, but I will say a couple of thoughts on that. One is that I feel like in the individual missions, and I'm not certain of this, I've got some other thoughts on strategies to play and things like that, but in the individual missions, I felt like you've got a reasonable amount of agency to influencing. Some of the decisions feel a little bit obvious, it's like I could do this, but yet it's still in every mission, there's going to be a number of points when you're playing an individual mission where you're going to have to make decisions, and it's not always clear what's going to be, and you really have to kind of think about what you're doing, and you have influence over the outcome with that type of decision. However, the way I would recommend you play this game, there's three ways to play the game, and this kind of connects to the depth. Right? You can play an individual mission by itself, half-hour experience, and you're done. Or you can play the historical campaign, where you get the historical setting for that mission exactly as it happened in World War II, and you play out those 9 missions in sequence and see how you do compared against history. The other way that you can play the game, the third way, is that you can play what's called the custom campaign. And that way, your future technology and the defense of the harbors that you're going into depend on how you do in previous missions, and that's the way I recommend. That's the way I think this game comes to life, is with that. And why it does that is because now you've got so much more agency and you've got so much more skin in the game, right? So when you're playing an individual mission, the lives of your commandos don't really matter that much. You're trying to maximize your points for that individual mission. But all of a sudden, when you bring in the custom campaign, you have to make the decision, do I risk my commando right now that has experience to try to sink this ship, or do I play it a little bit more conservative to try to save their lives so I'll have a better commando for the next mission? So you're constantly evaluating that risk versus reward decision layer, and that, I think, adds a ton of agency to the game and a ton of richness to the experience. It's no longer one-dimensional. You're trying to maximize your points for this particular mission. You've got a long-term campaign to think about. You've got to think about what mission's next. You've got to think about all these different risk-reward factors, and that, I really, really enjoyed the custom campaign element. That brings in a richness of agency that elevates the whole experience. I think game squared, right, is when you add that in. So I highly recommend, if you do get this game, play a couple of missions, then jump into the custom campaign. That's the best. That's the most fun for me, because it exponentially increases the interest, the engagement, the fun, and the agency that's involved with the game. The other element that comes into play when you play the custom campaign game is that now you're getting technology points based on your victory points, and you decide what elements of your SLC you're going to improve and how you're going to improve the performance of your SLCs, those underwater torpedo units, over time. And that can influence strategy. So there's some really interesting decisions to make in terms of how you're going to spend your victory points to increase the functionality and the technology of your craft. So again, there's even more agency beyond the missions themselves. It's that intermission decision making that adds a whole nother layer of agency. Let's talk a little bit about depth. I feel like there's a lot of variety in how you can play this game. There's a lot of variety that comes out through, especially in the custom campaign game again, because the defenses of harbors are going to change. You've got 3 different harbors that you can have missions in, although the majority of them, 2/3 of them, I think, are in Gibraltar. So there's a certain amount, you're going to be in Gibraltar quite a bit, but the harbor defenses are going to change and improve over time in that campaign. The capabilities of your SLCs are going to improve. The capacities of your crews, whether you come in with an experienced crew or an inexperienced crew, and where you've chosen to spend those experience points is another element of agency and variety that comes into the game. So I felt like every mission was different than the one before that and presented some unique challenges. Having said that, I think at a certain point in time, it's like kind of like you're playing baseball in a different stadium against a different team, right? It's like you're still playing baseball, and so this mission type experience, you're like, okay, yeah, I'm starting to get comfortable with the decisions and things like that. I feel like after playing the custom campaign game, I want to play another one. I'm not going to make a video series of it because we just finished that video series, but I want to play a custom campaign game again because I feel like I learned a lot of things, made a bunch of mistakes that I'd like to correct. So I feel like I could play this custom campaign probably 2 or 3 times, and well as individual missions. I'd also like to play the historical campaign. So I feel like I'm probably going to get about 20, 25 hours of gameplay out of this before I'd say, yeah, I've really played this out and played it completely. So I feel like there's a lot of depth and agency in a game that has as its core, roughly a 30 to 45 minute mission type of experience there. So really good job in expanding out the depth and variety of the game. I feel like there's good value for the money in the box as you buy it. It's not a game you're going to play a couple hours and think, well, it's just another mission, right? There's a richness here that I think the designers have spent a lot of time focusing on how to give this game added variety, depth, and ways to play it. So a lot of depth in here that I think reflects the value. You get good value with your money, I think, for this one. Components and research. Not too much to say about that. Although, I mean, you can see it from the box. You can see it from some of the screenshots and things like that. The blues and the black, the deep, rich blue. I mean, you feel like you're underwater. You feel like you're in part of this game. And it really pulls you. I mean, I've heard it referenced, I think it was Volker Runke that said part of playing war games is time travel, and it brings you there, And I think it's both the components and the color palette and the choice of design combined with the historical research. So, as I was doing the video series of the campaign for this, a lot of times I was looking for images of some of the harbors. And I'd kind of Google search, okay, Gibraltar Harbor, World War II. And I'd see a bunch of images of harbors in World War II come up. Not all of them are Gibraltar. But as I'm looking through the images, like, oh, that's Gibraltar Harbor right there, because I knew it from the layout of the game. They've got the actual ships that were in the harbor on that night, in their positions. The date is there, the actual names of the commandos that were in the teams on that. The historical research that goes behind this, they could have done that an easy way. Let's just put it that way. But it's obvious that there was a ton of intentionality behind making this gameplay experience a lot like reliving history. And I think I'll talk about that a little bit when I talk about some of my thoughts and reflections on some of the other pieces. But that's what really makes it feel like, wow, I'm here. These are the actual guys with their pictures on the cards that did this mission. And they did it in this harbor, and they sank that ship. And when you read about some of the exploits that happened to their missions and their tasks, their missions in real life, you're like, oh my God, the incredible bravery. You sense that bravery that these crews needed in order to be able to try to execute these missions, and the sheer madness of some of them. It's like, wow, they actually did this. I mean, I had no idea this existed as a part of World War II, and I feel like I've learned a ton of history about these crews and these missions, and in a way that a game gives you more than a book gives you. So components and historical research I put together, they do a fantastic job of bringing you back in time, helping you to relive history and learn a ton about what these men actually did in World War II. So fantastic job there that really enhances, I think, the gameplay experience. I have one slight negative thing to say about components as well. My board for Gibraltar, it sat out on the table for a while. It started to warp just a little bit, noticeably. Didn't impact gameplay. This is the second DVG game I've had that's done that. I've had Sherman Leader warped a lot. It was kind of like, whoa, that's really warped. I have been able to flatten this one back out by putting it in the box on the bottom of all the components, and it looks better right now. But for a game that's $60-70, it didn't impact gameplay, but for a game that's $60-70, you're kind of like, be nice if that didn't happen, right? I mean, it was probably like a quarter of an inch, but it was noticeable on Gibraltar by the end of the game. It's kind of like, I wish that didn't happen. I haven't had it happen with other companies' game boards yet, so it was just a point of observation. Again, it didn't impact gameplay, but it's like, A few thoughts and observations on things after playing through the 9-mission campaign that I'm not sure these are criticisms. I think they may be opportunities for improvement. And again, most of these sit out on the periphery of the experience. There's a victory. So in the campaign game, you're playing for victory points. And you're going to get victory points based on sinking ships. You're going to get victory points on scuttling and saving your SLC and saving your crews. And this connects to another point, too, that the first and sixth mission on that 9-mission campaign in particular are extraordinarily difficult, right? And there are a number of times, it's happened a couple times in other missions too, where the victory point mechanic made it feel obvious to me that my best interest was to abandon the mission well before it would have made historical sense to do so. Because literally in the first mission, I feel like if you're trying to win at the campaign game and maximize your victory points, your best strategy for the first mission and maybe the sixth mission is to, on the very first turn, scuttle your SLCs and get your crafts out, because you're going to have all of your extra die rolls to try to save them, and you're probably going to get 6 victory points. And the part about that amps that up a little bit is that if your SLCs get captured, if you don't scuttle your SLC and you don't save your crew, those increase the number of points that go into the harbor defenses. So by scuttling and saving your crews in the very first turn of a mission, you're going to get 6 victory points, and the harbor defenses aren't going to increase at all. Given the likelihood in those missions, especially if you've got inexperienced crews, which you will have in the first mission, you may or may not have in the 6th mission. Given that decision there, going in and attacking the ships, because if you sink a 1-point cargo ship, which might be your best opportunity for some of those missions, you're going to get 1 victory point. But if you lose your SLC and your crew, which you're probably going to do in that first mission, and very likely going to do in the 6th mission if they're inexperienced, you're going to lose those 2. You're not going to get those 2 points, but you're going to increase the harbor defenses by 2 points. And there were a few times in other missions where that same feeling came over. It's like, I really should scuttle this SLC and save this crew. But historically, that wouldn't make any sense, right? You wouldn't put 3 commando teams in the water at midnight and say, okay, go sink something in that harbor, and the commando crews go, yeah, no thanks, we're going to scuttle our crews and abandon the mission because that's the best thing for us to do. So make a long story short, I feel like that victory point mechanic around that scuttling and saving your crews thing could be tweaked just a little bit to de-incentivize something that felt ahistorical. Because especially making the videos, there are a number of times where I felt like, okay, I'm making a video about this. I'm not going to bail out on this mission, because they wouldn't do that. But if I were playing this game off camera, I'm absolutely scuttling my crafts and I'm abandoning this mission because I want my crews to get out alive. I want to try to get those 6 victory points, and I don't want to increase the harbor defenses. So it's like a minor point for, I think, improvement in terms of that victory point mechanic in the campaign game. I also want to talk a little bit about the card deck. And you're playing the game as the commandos. The British defenses operate on a card deck mechanism. When you draw a high card, they perform well. When you draw a low card, they don't perform that well. And the low cards are good for you, and the high cards are good for the defense. And then there's a 12 in the deck. That's the reset card. So when you pick a 12, that's a bad thing for you as the commandos. And then you pull out all the lowest numbers cards from the deck, reshuffle the deck, and reset the deck. The issue with that is that based on the number of cards, if that 12 shows up late in the deck, a lot of times, there are a number of times, probably 4 or 5 times in the campaign, where I've got like 5 cards left and I know one of them's a 12. And even though I wasn't trying to count cards, there was also an element of, a lot of times I would pull the high cards early in the mission, and I'm like, I know a lot of the high cards are gone. We can kind of take some risks here, because we know there's a lot of low cards left, and vice versa. If we pulled a lot of low cards early in a mission, it's like, I know the high cards are coming. It's like, and so that creates this element of predictability that's a little bit ahistorical. I wonder if one way to mitigate that would be to have like a 1 card in the deck that's super low. Then when you pull that, you take out the highest numbered card from the deck and reset it that way, to kind of randomize that sense of fate that I got 5 cards left. I know one of them's a 12. And we're screwed when that happens, So there was a little bit of oddness there that felt like I was making decisions because I knew what cards were coming, or could potentially come, that influence play a little bit. And I wonder if there might be a way to mitigate that element of the game, because it felt a little bit ahistorical that, okay, I pulled all the high cards in the first half hour, in the first hour of the mission, so because the British were really good then, I knew they were going to be bad for the next 2 hours, or vice versa. That felt a little bit awkward at times. A couple other things. The first and 6th missions are brutally hard, and really hard. Like, wow, like, this is hard. And we're all going to die kind of thing. However said that, though, I think that brings in that element of history. This is what it was like for those particular missions in history. I mean, these guys died all the time. And they get captured all the time. And you look at the historic record, so many times they're bringing in fresh crews because their chances of survival just weren't that good. So a couple of these missions that they actually did were brutally hard. And the game recreates that. So you have to be okay with that. And especially as that first mission, if you get the game and you're playing the campaign game, first mission, don't get discouraged. Just a couple of other observations before we wrap up. I want to just mention a little bit about the XP system. I don't think this is a positive feature or a negative feature. It's just an observation I had that might help you if you're going to play the game a little bit. The XP system appears quite elaborate and quite deep. So as I started my campaign out, I thought, okay, I'm going to try to emphasize having my crews survive rather than sink ships. And what I kind of realized as I played more is that this elaborate, the kind of in-depth player commando development system, it's really hard for your crews to survive. So at least I didn't have any luck getting that far on it. And what you realize is, a lot of these times you're ending the mission. If everything goes well, you've probably got a very good chance for a commando crew to survive. If things don't go well, or you have some bad luck, or stuff happens, or you get a bad roll, they're going to die. And so a lot of times you're getting to the end of a mission, at least I was, and your crews have a 1 in 3 chance of surviving, or a 2 out of 3 chance of surviving, and maybe you've got 2 rolls, and so they're probably going to survive. But eventually, it seemed like I was losing probably 2 crews per mission out of the 3s that went on there. So it was really hard to advance those crews and get deep into that commando development system where we had a crew that maybe had 4 or 5 experience points. I think the highest we had was a couple times we had 2 crews have 2 experience points before they died on the next mission or got captured on the next mission or something like that. So I think I would play more aggressively in a second game. That brings up the last thing I thought I would talk a little bit about, which is the overall difficulty of the game. Does it feel hard? Does it feel right? And I feel like the difficulty of the game is really it's a strong point of the game. In our custom campaign, we didn't really play the last mission, but I'm pretty sure we're going to end up with a minor loss over 9 missions, and that's what I'm going to call it. It's like a minor loss out of 7 different victory conditions or something like that. We were in the minor loss range. And that feels about right. I made a rules mistake in the first 2 or 3 missions where I didn't use the breathing gear right, and that would have helped us a lot. And I kind of keep thinking on that, like if we had used that correctly, we might have had more damage done and maybe even had a couple of crews survive those earlier missions, which might have got us ahead of that curve a little bit, enabled us to increase technology more, and perhaps kind of influence the outcome by like maybe 5, 10, maybe even 15 points or so. Because 1 battleship's worth 10 points. That's a lot of points in the whole campaign. So I feel like, that's something I want to play again off camera, go through the custom campaign again, see if I can get a win condition. And that's something I think is going to help a lot. There's also kind of some unique tactics you can make with movement that I didn't really kind of figure out till about halfway through the campaign. And I think I played too conservatively in the earlier missions of the campaign and didn't really take advantage of that scuttle and save your crews for like the first mission, right? Which is, I think, the best way to play if you're actually trying to win the campaign game. So I'd like to try again. I think there's a lot more strategies and tactics to remember. The difficulty on the whole felt really good. I mean, I feel like a minor loss as a first time through the custom campaign, and I felt like I was challenged the whole way. Definitely not too easy, definitely not too hard, although there are going to be missions, again, where you're just going to get hammered and you have to just go, well, we're just going to bounce back and the next mission might be good, So it really kind of can vary a lot. You can feel like you just got crushed, and then the subsequent mission you can feel like you've just absolutely destroyed the British Navy and your commandos are gods, kind of things like that. I've been also thinking, one of the thoughts I had is when you play the game, is the correct decision always the correct decision? And are there varieties of ways to approach your missions? One of the things I think about I'd like to explore in a second campaign is we, by and large, kept our commandos beneath the surface. And I wonder if you had a commando team with good operational skill, if you could keep them on the surface, and instead of trying to avoid detection, could you have them run really fast? Because you can move 4 squares if you do your movement right on the surface. You can do a 3 and a 1. If you hit your operational rolls, you can theoretically outrun the patrol boats then until you get close to the harbor entrance. And a lot of what you're trying to do in this game is to save time, because it's so finely balanced that if you lose a couple of hours when something breaks or you get stuck at like the torpedo nets or something like that, you can run out of time. And when you get later in the missions, the chances are that your commandos are going to get captured goes up. So a lot of kind of things just start to work against you as you run out of time. And if you could save some time that way and get to the harbor entrance really fast, that might be an optimal strategy. So I find myself kind of playing with different ways to approach tactics and strategies in the game that might be fun to explore in another campaign. To wrap up, I really had a great time playing this custom campaign. Again, I'm going to play another one off camera to see if I can get a victory. I'll probably tweet out some tweets about it as I go through it. I'm going to take a break for a while to play some other games first and things. But really enjoyed it, highly recommend it. I'd be happy to entertain questions down below. If you have liked this series and our review of this game, you might also enjoy, if you haven't seen it yet, our series with the Hunters from GMT Games, which is a game, I consider the experiences very similar in terms of the emotions and the drama that these games create. So you might like our series with that. I'll put up a link here to the first episode. Thanks so much for tuning in. Again, happy to entertain questions. I'm interested to read your comments down below. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.